in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is light. We're grateful for all the work volunteered by many different groups supporting our process, including the scientific community, academia, civil society, financial sectors and business, indigenous people and local community, youth, women organization, international organization, cities and local authorities and sub-government, and of course, you, the parties, particularly those that have organized events to support our process. I could not name everybody, but we thank you very much. We are impressed by your tireless capacity as delegates to work with us online under very difficult circumstances, facing technical challenges of meeting virtually and staying up very late at night or early in the morning hours. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a serious toll on our collective work. Not only has it delayed the development and adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, it has also a huge financial implication on countries. Nevertheless, we are optimistic that the international community will rise up to help close the financial gap on biodiversity finance. Investing in biodiversity means investing in the future of humanity. The science is clear and calls us to take urgent action across society if we are to put biodiversity back on a path to recovery by 2030. Science is also telling us that our action need to address in a balanced way all drivers of biodiversity loss. We truly need all ends, and here we would like to recognize the dedication of commitment of our partners around the world from all parts of society and the whole of governments that has assembled here in Geneva and joining us online. I would now like to give the floor to my co-chair Francis to address this meeting.
Dear delegates, we are also pleased to see that the linkages between climate change and biodiversity are beginning to take center stage and are being picked up by other international processes. We have heard the message loud and clear from the climate change COP26 and the Glasgow Pact that biodiversity is a key to both successful climate mitigation and adaptation, as well as the call to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And we welcome the many new financial commitments for nature made on the margins of the climate conference. We further welcome the outcomes of the resumed fifth meeting or session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNEA, that concluded earlier this month. In particular, the resolutions on biodiversity and health, plastics, and nature-based solutions. Looking ahead to the second part of COP15, it is clear to us that this conference will not just be about what we could do for nature, but also about what can we do for climate. In closing, we are very pleased to be here with you today in person after working over the distance for far too long, and my co-chair has said that, and reconnecting with friends. Let us take this positive energy and use it to create consensus here in Geneva to bring us closer to the adoption of an ambitious and transformative post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Before we begin, we would like to invite the Secretariat to provide us some logistical information for the meeting. Secretariat.
Thank you, co-chairs. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased. It's such a pleasure to see you all in person again and say just good afternoon and not good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So, as described by my colleague in the joint plenary this morning, the Secretariat has put in place measures to reduce the risk of COVID-19 infection. Inside the venue, delegates are required to wear face masks at all times, except when directly addressing the meeting, or when eating or drinking in the restaurant areas. We seek your cooperation to respect social distancing and to avoid overcrowding in the meeting rooms. Kindly remember that a negative test result must be shown to get access to the venue every day. Please also note that no food or drinks are permitted in the meeting rooms except for sealable water bottles. The proceedings of all plenary and contact group sessions can also be followed online using the online platform Interactio in viewer mode by all registered delegates. Access is provided via the meeting calendar using the credentials provided with your priority pass. For the few parties for which travel of representatives to Geneva was not possible because of travel restrictions, a full interactive virtual participation will be enabled following a special request to the Secretariat. These participants have been contacted directly to facilitate their participation. Now moving to the use of the microphones. Turning to the use of the microphones here in the room, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the button in front of you only once. We will be notified of your request, and it will be entered in a queue list visible to the chair. Please note that pressing the button twice will cancel your request to speak. Also on Interactio, it's the same on both, for both the sessions, for both the ways to interact. When the chair gives you the floor, the light on your microphone will turn red. Please start speaking when the light comes on. Please remove your earphone. Speak close to the microphone, slowly and clearly, so that our dedicated team of interpreters can provide a clear translation. Some observers and delegates who request the floor may not be identified by their organization names. In these cases, when your microphone is on, please be sure to identify your organization before commencing your intervention. Statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will be limited to 5 minutes on behalf of regions or groups, 3 minutes for individual parties, 3 minutes for major stakeholders, and 2 minutes for observers, as time allows. The time for statements is limited. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading. Rather, when speaking, please pause between sentences to make it easier for the interpreters and all the delegates to follow. For statements made in plenary on items where we are having a first reading or a continued first reading, delegates are requested to upload their statements using the online application on the meeting page. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you can upload your statements in advance of delivery. And you can do that through the priority pass or your badges, the number on your badges. However, they will be posted on the website only after delivery. In any case, statements must be posted on the same day that they were made or the agenda item considered. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email along with your dedicated link, and you can also use the number on your badge, which leads you directly to the upload page. Thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you, Secretariat. Dear delegates, we will now turn our attention to item 2 of the agenda, and that is the adoption of the agenda and organization of work. Over to you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Francis. Distinguished delegates, we'll now move to agenda item 2, adoption of the agenda and organization of work. Before we begin, let us keep in mind that the rule of procedure for the meeting of the Conference of the Parties apply mutatis mutandis to the meeting of the working group. Ms. Lena Al-Hawadi of Kuwait was elected in the first part of the meeting and has accepted to continue as rapporteur for this meeting. All our thanks to Ms. Al-Hawadi for agreeing to continue this responsibility, and we look forward to working with her in this coming run. Shukran. Distinguished delegates, let us now turn to the organization of work. We would like to remind you that the revised provisional agenda contained in document CBD Working Group 2020-3 was adopted at the first part of the third meeting of the working group. At the end of the first part of the meeting, the working group adopted a report that provides information on the status of the work on each agenda item. For the resumed meeting of the working group, we would like to refer you to the supplementary annotation to the agenda provided in document CBD Working Group 2020-3 Addition 3, which was prepared in consultation with the COP Bureau. For our resume meeting and its relationship to the resume meetings of Substat 24 and SBI-3, the Executive Secretary, in consultation with the two Bureau, prepared the proposed organization of work, which is provided in the annex to the joint scenario note and contained in document CBD Working Group 2020-3 Add 2 Rev 4. We would like to suggest that in order to make efficient use of time and to allow more time for discussion, we refrain from making individual statements to thank or congratulate the co-chair, our host, or the secretariat. Now we would like to give you some explanation on the proposed organization of work for the working group as outlined in the scenario note. This meeting will be a mixture of plenary and contact group meetings. Today we will consider agenda item 3 and open our work on agenda item 4. The 4 contact groups already established under agenda item 4 will continue their work, as will be explained in more details in a minute. We will address agenda item 5 on digital sequence information, DSI, at our next plenary on Monday, 21 March. These sessions have been scheduled to avoid a conflict for those delegates attending the meeting on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, which is ongoing this week. Accordingly, we will start our plenary meeting on Monday, 21 March, with an update on the intersessional work from the co-lead of the informal working group, Mr. Gote Voigt Hansen from Norway and Ms. Leticia Chiwamulomoni from South Africa. This will be followed by some time for regional and other statements. There will be 2 sessions of the DSI contact group, which will take place Wednesday, 23rd of March from 3 to 6, and Thursday, 24th of March from 3 to 6 to conclude this work. In the same plenary, on Monday, the 21st of March, we will receive report back from the contact group that have met under item 4. We will also have some time to consider the draft decision on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. At our final plenary on Tuesday, 29 March, we will review the outcome of the contact groups under agenda item 4 and 5, adopt the respective recommendation, consider any other matters under agenda item 6, and adopt the meeting report. The draft text of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework reflecting our work at this meeting will be annexed to the recommendation under item 4. Do we see any requests from the floor? At this point in time, Basil, I see a request from the floor. Basil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As is the first time my delegation takes the floor, I take this opportunity to thank and congratulate the Swiss government and the CET of Geneva for hosting us. GBF should have been adopted.
Can the technician give the floor to Brazil? Apologies for technical issues.
Okay, thank you. GBF should have been adopted in 2020, and we're still in the process of reading the first draft, which you must keep in mind that was not a result of a proper negotiation over the draft zero, and it's mainly based on the views of both of the co-chairs of the OEG. Brazil understands that we're currently in a very early stages of negotiations in all aspects of the GBF, and everything remains open for further discussions here in Geneva. We do understand that the current approach, in which the co-chairs have the main responsibility on suggesting tests, was adopted due to conditions imposed by the pandemic. We are very grateful for the drafts and reflection that both co-chairs have presented to us. But it's past time for parties to take our responsibilities and move to a process that will only be successful if it's party-driven. My delegation came here ready to engage in a drafting process to move forward in developing the GBF. Therefore, we are deeply frustrated to what appeared to be a strategy to postpone negotiations and keep parties locked into a test prepared by very few hands, while continuing discussions without clear and agreed outcomes. A truly global framework should take into account concerns, priorities, and needs from all regions, recognize the different realities among parties. There was an evolution from draft zero, but the current GBF test still looks like a northern view of a southern framework. A truly global GBF should result in responsibilities and benefits to all. The responsibilities included in the first draft, currently restricted to a few parties, are already clearly stated, in particular regarding conservation. We are still waiting for an opportunity to reach a better distribution of responsibilities. And we need to move towards making clear what are the benefits to all, with measurable targets and scientifically sound indicators across all the three objectives of the Convention. Mr. Chairman, as it currently stands, GBF looks more like a political response than a practical solution to the loss of biodiversity. GBF should be the translation of a political will into practical and effective actions. Real commitments demand substantial actions beyond strong words. To achieve this, it's necessary to open the drafting process to all interested parties. To conclude, and in our reaction to your initial comments, we remind that it's a meeting of the Convention of Biological Diversity, and our decisions must be made under the Convention scope and mandate, and must not encroach on the mandates of other multilateral agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I don't see any other requests for the floor. So, and in terms of organization of the work, I understand this. Yeah. Thank you very much. So we see no objection to the organization of the work, and we're sure that delegates will be able to bring their perspective in the discussion that are coming over the coming days. So the organization of the work is adopted. Distinguished delegates, we have now completed item 2 of the agenda for our meeting, and we are moving to the next item. And I'll pass the floor to Francis.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Dear delegates, let us now turn to agenda item 3, that is progress since the second meeting of the working group. Distinguished delegates, you will recall that we considered agenda item 3 at the first part of our third meeting. The working group took note of the outcomes of the consultations conducted and other contributions received regarding the preparation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework since the second meeting of the working group, as provided in the note by the Executive Secretary. For this meeting, dear delegates, we would like to provide an update on activities that were carried out since the first part of the third meeting. And we're going to do this in our slide presentation.
Could we project the screen, please? Thank you.
Yes.
Not yet. It's so tiny. Okay, dear delegates, I hope you can see from the screen the updates that we're going to give to you. But basically, most of you will know that it is 2 years, we have been saying, all of us have been acknowledging this. It is 2 years since we last had a physical meeting. And we are having the meeting more or less at about the same time. In March 2020, we're in Rome. In March 2022, we are here in Geneva. So you could ask yourself, if by 2020 October we are supposed to have adopted the framework, what it would have looked like? Because today we could be coming to look at now assessing progress of implementation. So the good news is that these 2 years has given us a chance to keep looking at and reflecting on what we could do and have a framework that should help us have that transformative outcome that we are talking about. So we had the first draft, which we updated basing on the outcomes of Rome. We have actually the very, very original zero draft, which we had in August 2020, that was prepared using the outcome from Rome. And then we had virtual meetings. Based on that, we were able to update and come up with draft 1. We are hearing a lot of views about draft 1. Somewhere we heard that we are not dealing with drivers of biodiversity loss, but in many instances, you, the parties, will tell us to do this now. You will tell us to do this at another point. For example, you said in the zero draft, merge the goals on ecosystem, on species, on genetic into one. So now in draft 1, you see that goal A is a little bit expanded to take that into account. That was based on what we had. But again, you'll go into your working group and tell us what you think about that. Then we had the first part of this meeting, that was August, September last year. Then the virtual meeting of SAPSTA and SBI we participated in. You also know that we did good work on the 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook. And then we had a series of webinars. I think this pandemic has taught us something. We thought then that we are all going to work online, physically, and end the discussion on this framework. But much of the discussion has been actually online. And so, moving forward, as they say, the new, normal, how are we going to be integrating those kind of approaches as we move along? But also we have had advice from the scientific community. We have had discussions on resource mobilization, planning, review, and reporting. And then there are some reports that has come from colleagues who have looked at the economics of biodiversity. We have reports from IPCC. And then all this has informed us in updating the framework. Now, if you want to see how much work we've done in the period since then up to now, you can see that document which is at the bottom of the slide. Please go there and you will see the details in there. Next slide. So as we have said, this is our first meeting, the first physical meeting after Rome. But dear delegates, I think, don't take it for granted that there's a lot of time left. In fact, we are beginning a countdown because COP could be in September, COP could be in August. What are you going to do in a contact group of only 3 hours? And there is so much to do. So, as you go into the contact group, make the best use of the 3 hours. If you take the floor and you begin thanking yourselves for resuming the meeting, you are costing everybody time. So please, the resumed meeting is very important, but let's make use of it. So we expect, of course, that this is the last meeting before the framework is adopted. And as I said, we are on a countdown. No more that you see this is still an online meeting. We shall meet physically. Now we are here. The song of, I don't know, was it November, September last year, is no more. We are here. We have to make a decision. You have to make the best use of time, and we get to what we need. So we need to see, of course, how best we use our time here. One thing we have to note is that, as I said earlier, that now there is something coming positive from climate change meetings. You've heard about some of the financial commitments from there, the Glasgow Pact. These are encouraging developments. How are we going to take it forward? And other important, of course, development happened when the meetings I've referred to at UNEA on plastics, on NBS, on biodiversity and health. These are encouraging development as we discuss the framework. Next slide. Then you will have before you the co-chair's reflection. Now, this reflection, we took into account what took place in August, September last year, the virtual meeting. Very good discussion, very good input. But we thought as co-chairs, we needed to see how we could contribute to the process when we meet physically. And therefore, in the co-chair's reflection document, which I encourage you to look at, we have made proposals which you could take on, depending on how the discussion got the contact group. You may find that you reach a point where perhaps it is very difficult to make progress, but the co-chairs have made some suggestions. Can that move you forward faster? Can it move you forward? So please have that document with you. And we have been very, very honest when doing that. We took all the views that came. Also does not lose substance. Now, section BBs has been proposed to be included in framework. And we are thinking that this is on implementation guidance or principles of implementation. Again, that is something we're going to look at. As I've said earlier, we've had views that the framework should be simple. It should be one that can be communicated. It should have smart goals, smart targets, smart milestones. You've heard all this before. So what are we going to do when we are trying to make it simple? We've heard that being simple doesn't mean you write only 2 lines. That you could also have 2, 3 paragraphs, but which is simple enough. But the question would be, then how many pages would you want to have if you're going to have so many 3 paragraphs and so forth? So there's a divide there. Simple, not too many pages, but something that can be understood. The other part I want to highlight to you, dear delegates, is on the goals and targets. And we've heard people talk about this. Please bear in mind that the goals and targets are global. And you'll see global put in italics. They are global in nature. But we expect that the national contribution could therefore help us to arrive at those global targets. So when you see them, please take into account that. It is global target, global goals. So countries will have, when they are revising and aligning their NBSAPs, they will take into account how they contribute to that. If you need us to explain that more, we can explain. Next slide. So we are going to briefly again tell you about the 2050 vision. And this is something we think we do not need to debate on. That was already decided, that one we are going to take it on as is, living in harmony with nature. So the goals tell us where we want to be in 2050. You want to be in harmony with nature in 2050. So the goals basically should drive us there. That is what the goals should drive. So they are outcome oriented. We have the milestones which can help us measure progress towards 2030. And then we have the targets, which are action-oriented. But also we have the monitoring framework, which actually gives you the indicators for monitoring progress. And I have to say here that there is a new kind of positive thinking or a positive way in which we are looking at this framework. Those of you associated with or took into account the process for developing the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020 will know that we first adopted that framework and started working on the monitoring framework, the indicators, later on, and that took us time. It took us a lot of time. And I think we adopted indicators just like 4 years to the end of the life cycle of that strategic plan. This time, this is happening concurrently. So let's welcome that and see how we move it forward. Then the other one is on the time frame for the targets. We are talking of currently up to 2030. So could we maintain that? Remember, we are trying to link up with the SDGs, which ends in 2030. If we go beyond 2030, how do we then strategically place our targets beyond that? Because we are trying to make sure that the framework is very relevant to the SDGs. And we are trying to market it at that level. So that is why you see the 2030 still remains, despite us losing 2 years. So you'll have to discuss that and see what do you do with the years. We could retain that, we could, and with justification. Then sections H to K, this is on implementation support mechanisms, the enabling condition, responsibility, and transparency. We heard people talking about transparency in the morning, responsibility, outreach, awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, today climate change seems to just automatically go up there when people are talking about the crisis facing the world. But biodiversity, what happened to it? What really happened to biodiversity? That if the meeting is there, you rarely see the global community reporting as intensively as they do for climate change. Yet, biodiversity is the very reason we are surviving here. Without it, who would be here on this planet, irrespective of who you are? Something obvious to us for survival, for achievement of even for the SDGs, but the attention is not that good. So what do we need to do in terms of awareness? You have heads of states going to attend climate change. What happens with biodiversity? You have the head of state of that country alone. Maybe with the other, now ministers coming in. But the encouraging bit was it that during the part 1, which we had COP15 part 1, other heads of state are participating virtually. Could we see them in Kunming? That would be a plus for the convention as such and biodiversity cause. I'm trying to raise the issue of awareness about biodiversity. How is it going to happen differently in post-2020? Next slide, then I will hand over to co-chair. So we have had comments at the first part of the meeting of this group relating to the structure of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And there has been this discussion. Is it possible to nest the targets to the goals? Meaning people are looking at more or less the structure of the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020, where you have the goals, targets. But if you look at the current arrangement, and my co-chair I think has a slide on that, giving you one example. We are saying all these goals, all the targets contribute to implementing sometimes more than one goal. But that will be explained. Sections H to K relate to issues being discussed under SBI, and subset D, you have the monitoring, reporting, review, resource mobilization, capacity building, and the monitoring framework. So contact group 4 will draw upon SAPSA and SBI discussion on these when considering sections H to K. Co-chair, over to you.
Thank you, Francis. And if we can have the next slide, please. Colleagues, before we get, and this is just an illustration of the concept. We're not here to defend one position, we're here to listen to you, and we're acting on the mandate and the decision of the COP to have a party-led process, which was further confirmed by the first part of COP15. So we have here a representation that show the proposal by a group of science experts for one goal. They choose to work on goal A, and they choose to show us how it is not one target that is contributing to one goal and we can slot them easily. There is actually a complex, multiplex relationship between a number of targets and this goal. So this is one concept and one way to look at the situation. I'm sure you will have discussion as you will be starting the discussion on this in contact group 1 tomorrow, but we wanted to make sure that you have this information available to you. If you could, we could go to the next slide and we'll speak a little bit about the organization and the work of the contact group. We heard the message very clearly from you at the end of the online session in August and September that you wanted a more predictable and consistent approach across all the contact group. We spent quite a bit of time with the co-leads and the SCBD support staff to develop a consistent approach. We tried to give a lot of thought to these issues and how we could achieve compromise. We have presented the key message from the reflection document once to you in webinars, but we will be at the end able to provide you with further guidance and to a summary. We expect that a non-paper will be issued after the first session of each contact group. This non-paper, if you're not able to cover all the issues, may be continued with a second installment later in the process. And then you will be able to consider all that. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the expectation. We're trying to make best use of the time. And in that context, we are asking that you limit any statement you're going to be making in this plenary on new proposal. If your issues have already been introduced and recorded in the first part of the meeting, we're asking you that you refrain from repeating them so that we make best use of the time. We also recommend that we work collectively toward compromise as much as possible. We would like to narrow down the final wording as much as possible. And we would like to repeat that at the end, we will be assembling the various reports from the contact group into a comprehensive report and status of the GBF text that will be annexed to the recommendation. Next slide, please. Here is a summary of the structure of the contact group and of the co-leads and the date in which they will be meeting. Contact group 1 has a heavy workload and will be dealing with section A to F. F is goals and milestone. And we're pleased to have Vinod Mathur from India and Norbert Berlacher from Switzerland providing leadership. Contact group 2 on a portion of section G, which is target 1 to 8, will be led by Teola Karchava and Rosemary Patterson from New Zealand. Teona Karchava is from Georgia. Section G, target 9 to 13, led by Ms. Gillian Guthrie from Jamaica and Gabrielle Obermeier from Austria. Section G, target 14 to 21, plus section H to K, will be led by Mrs. Ann Teller from the European Union and Mr. Jorge Murillo from Colombia. And contact group 5 on digital sequencing information will be led by Lacticia Chivuamumulomuni from South Africa and Gote Vogt Hansen. This is another way to increase parties' engagement. There is a large team that is representing all sides engaged in this process. So let's keep this last slide up as we will be discussing it, but Francis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Dear delegates, we hope we have been able to provide you with a good overview of the work we have undertaken together since our last meeting, as well as an idea of our expectations for this meeting. We will now close this agenda item.
Thank you, Francis, and I will lead you through the next agenda item. Let's now turn our attention to agenda item 4, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Brazil, you've asked for the floor. Please, if the floor can be given to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for taking the floor again. And thank you for this presentation. I was expecting any reaction to our statement, but since there were none, and based on this presentation, I would be very grateful if it could be, the co-chairs could elaborate on how is the way forward regarding the contact groups. There are references to non-papers. What is the objectives of producing these non-papers, and how they will be, if they will be at any point negotiated? It's not clear from our side. I think there is a lack of understanding on how we intend to move forward. And I would be very grateful if before our work starts, we're all on the same page when fully understanding on where we're going to be led at. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. That's a very useful question. So let me try to give you more detail, and I'll turn to Francis if he can be adding to that. The idea is we're going to have the first session of the contact group, and that will be your. In the subsequent session, you will have opportunity to negotiate and work, and the hope is that the hope is that we will be able to work from those non-papers. The non-papers can only be written once the contact group have started their work. They're not ready yet. The co-leads will be creating those non-papers based on what they have heard in the first session, and then you'll be able to negotiate. Let me clarify that we were not merely compiling the result of the contact group and annexing those. Those will be coming back to the plenary as CRP. So I hope this is this clarified, but I'll let Francis add to it.
Perhaps only to repeat it, but basically you've said it all. The way the non-papers will come, as Co-Chair said, is that when you go into the contact group, you will be making statements, submissions. The co-leads will listen to your submissions, and based on that, then they're going to produce a non-paper. And then you'll progressively discuss that non-paper, including that non-paper being the stage you have reached when we're having the first, I think, stock take. We shall be giving you the status of that non-paper as well. So your working documents in the contact group will basically be on the non-paper, which will be developed, as Co-Chair said, after the first meeting of each contact group, where you make statements, it is taken on board, and then they develop the non-paper. So more or less the way we've been doing it even within the CBD. So it's going to be transparent. It's going to give parties a chance to still, participate fully in the process. I hope this could help Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. If that's okay, we will resume with our work on agenda item 4. So as you know, we've established a contact group and you've seen the list. Each of this group will meet 3 times over the course of the next 2.5 weeks. The first meeting of the contact group will be followed by a sub-star contact group on monitoring framework for consistency between the 2 contact groups. It is our hope that each contact group will use the time here in Geneva to conclude on the language that should be included in the Global Biodiversity Framework for us to be able to finalize and adopt the framework at COP15 in Kunming. Let me add a few words about the operation of contact group. Contact group will last up to 3 hours. Up to 3 sessions of the different contact group can be scheduled per day. They will meet either from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., or from 7:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. local time in Geneva. No contact group of either SEPSTA or SBI are planned to run in parallel with those of the Working Group 2020. The contact groups are open to participation by all parties, other governments, and representatives of observers. The usual practice and rule will apply to participation of observers. They may speak at the discretion of the co-leads and given the floor after party speaks. Any substantive proposal from an observer must be supported by at least one party. As per the usual practice, the session cannot be recorded or shared through social media. The contact group will work in English, and accordingly, non-paper considered at the meeting of the group are in English. As per the usual practice, the outcome of the work of the contact group will be provided as CRP in all language for consideration by the plenary. We urge parties and stakeholders to make the best use of the time during the contact group. We have published a guidance note 2 days ago on the meeting webpage that provide delegates with further information on the organization of the work of the 5 contact group under this item. We now open the floor for any question for clarification. I see Canada requesting the floor. Can the floor be given to Canada?
Thank you, Chair. With some apologies in that Canada was not in a position to engage actively at the first part of OEWG3 last August due to domestic elections. And as such, I'd like to briefly, if you'll indulge me, take a few moments just to highlight a few key points that we would have raised at the time so that they're on the record for the leading into the resumed session. So generally, Canada certainly supports developing an ambitious and practical post-2020 global biodiversity framework that aims to halt and reverse the loss of nature by 2030 and achieve its full recovery by 2050. We see opportunities for streamlining the structure of the draft framework, including through reconsidering the inclusion of milestones, as well as opportunities to simplify goal and target language, eliminate duplication, and make the targets more understandable by the public. Areas of particular importance for us to highlight include ensuring that the framework does focus on the most important direct drivers of global biodiversity loss. Certainly Goal A and Targets 1 to 8 are important elements in the draft to advance that. We also want to strongly support the target associated with conserving 30% of lands and oceans by 2030 and ensure that this is ecologically representative, includes areas of particular importance for biodiversity, is in well-connected systems, and is equitably managed and effectively governed. Certainly also important to seek clear commitments from parties related to the sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as enhanced action on the sustainable management of biodiversity, including in key productive sectors. in the context of within the context of ecosystem-based approaches. And we see Goal B, targets 5 and 10 as key in the draft in advancing that. In addition, climate change and biodiversity, really looking for strong elements, including Target 8, that can aim to help address the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. And it's critical to ensure that that enhanced coordination and cooperation on addressing those together is done. On resource mobilization, looking for ensuring that the target 19 and goals around resource mobilization recognize the importance of mobilizing financing from all sectors, all sources, encouraging new and innovative financing and investments from the public and private sector, international financial institutions, and multilateral partners. And really underlining overall, and including in Target 1 and SBI-3 Item 5, recognizing there's a link there, considering the important role of Indigenous peoples, women, youth, as partners in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And finally, Chair, stronger planning, reporting, and review systems are going to be essential that can clearly track global progress and encourage countries to be accountable to commitments, as well as setting clear indicators for each goal and target. So we'll continue to strongly support efforts to strengthen these elements of the framework as we move forward, and look forward to continuing constructive discussions with other parties and other partners over the coming 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada, but I will urge others to stick to the question at hand, which is clarification of the organization of the contact group. I see several parties asking for the floor, so let's please keep to the question at hand, which is the organization of the work. China, you have requested the floor. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Chinese delegation would like to thank the government of Switzerland and the Secretariat for the work you have done for this meeting. Mr. Chair, we would like to reiterate the commitment made in Kunming Declaration to promote the 3 objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner. With regard to the framework, we would like to stress 3 points. First, balanced goals and practicality. Second, focusing on sustainable use. Third, alignment with the Convention and relevant COP14 mandates. China will engage constructively in the contact group discussions in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you, China. I see a request from Norway.
Thank you, Chair. Norway is taking the floor because we would like to add a limited set of additional text proposals to the GBF for consideration in the contact groups of this meeting, completing the proposals made by us in the first part of the meeting, addressing the issue of sustainable use specifically, where Norway said in the first part of the meeting that we would revert with a submission to the convention, which we have done. So is this something that we should do at this point, or do you want us to revert with our proposals and reasoning at a later time?
Thank you, Norway. Your point is duly noted, and I'm sure you will be able to have the good opportunity to take it in the contact group. Thank you very much. Thank you. This completes those rounds of questions. Before we approach the end of our plenary meeting, we would like to provide you with the name and the co-leads, and I don't think I will repeat them just for clarity. Contact Group 1 will be led by Vinod Mathur of India and Mr. Norbert Barloscher of Switzerland. The first meeting of Contact Group 1 will be held on Tuesday, 15 from 10 to 1. Contact Group 2 on target 1 to 8 will be shared by Ms. Teona Karchava of Georgia and Ms. Rosemary Patterson of New Zealand. We'll meet on Tuesday, 15 March from 3 to 6. Contact Group 3 target 9 to 13, co-led by Ms. Gillian Guthrie of Jamaica, Ms. Gabrielle Obermeier of Austria, will meet on Wednesday, 16 March, 10 to 1. Contact Group 4 has been focusing on target 14 to 21, led by Ms. Ann Teller of the European Union and Mr. Jorge Murillo of Colombia. Will meet on Thursday, 17 March, 10 to 1. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our plenary meeting for today. Before we close, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for any announcement. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to remind delegates that after this plenary has concluded, the opening plenary of the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation will take place. So right here, so please stay in this room. We would further like to remind delegates that Contact Group 1 under Working Group on Goal Structure and Sections A to E will meet tomorrow morning. Contact Group 2 under the Working Group on Targets 1 to 8 will meet in the afternoon. And both of these meetings will take place here in this plenary hall. Both the contact groups will meet here in this plenary hall. In the evening time slot, there will be a contact group on SBI item 9 on review mechanisms and a contact group on Substa item on health. Delegates are invited to continually check our website and the board for the latest information on rooms and any updates we might have on contact groups. Thank you.
Thank you. We are closing this session. Thank you.
Dear delegates, can I ask you please to take your seats? We will start the meeting now.
Could we have the SBI chair on screen, please? Could we have the chair on the screen, please?
Maybe they will know that it's not me, but it's the virtual chair.
Yeah. No, it's okay. There we go.
Okay, I think we can start.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It is my pleasure to welcome you all and to declare open this second part of the third meeting of a subsidiary body on implementation. Distinguished delegates, as you know, we are following a strict health and safety protocols at this meeting to help avoid the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Unfortunately, I myself tested positive last Saturday, and I'm now required to remain in quarantine for 5 days. Therefore, I will not be able to join you in person for the opening of SBI, even though I'm here in Geneva, and I'm really looking forward to meet you all in person after my quarantine period. As an alternative, I have joined you virtually to open the meeting and propose for organizational work. For the consideration of agenda item 6 and 5, I have asked a member of a COP Bureau, Ms. Gabriele Obermeier from Austria, to chair the meeting on my behalf. I hope this is acceptable to you. First, I would like to thank, of course, our host, the government of Switzerland, the executive secretary and the staff for the excellent preparations of this meeting. I also would like to thank the COP presidency, the Bureau of the Conference of Parties for their support. This meeting is intended to carry forward the work of SBI at the first part of its third meeting. We will seek to complete all SBI items, including the key inputs for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and lay a firm foundation for adoption of the framework later this year at the second part of COP15 in Kunming, China. SBI-3 will also continue its other work on matters related to the Convention, Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, and the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. We have a formidable agenda ahead of us and a limited amount of negotiation time. But I know you have been diligent in your preparations for this meeting, Since the first part of our meeting last year, you have actively engaged in a wide range of briefing webinars, virtual workshops, online discussions, and informal consultations. I'm therefore confident that we will find a way together forward and make clear progress at this meeting with determination, flexibility, and of course, patience. We will now turn our attention to our first agenda item. Distinguished delegates, I now invite you to consider agenda item 2, adoption of agenda and organizational work. Before we begin, let us remind ourselves that the rule of procedure for the meeting of a conference of parties apply mutandis to meetings of SBI. You may recall that Mr. Eric Amangoriogana was elected as rapporteur at the first part of our meeting, and he will continue in that role during this second part of the meeting, and I'm looking forward to working with him in the coming days. Let us now turn to the organization of work. I would like to remind you that the revised provisional agenda contained in document CBD-Live 1 was adopted at the first part of a third meeting of SBI. At the end of the first part of the meeting, the SBI adopted a report that provides information on status of the work of each agenda item. For this second part of the meeting, I would like to refer you to the supplementary annotations to the agenda provided in document CBD-SBI-3 1 Add 3, which was prepared in consultation with the COP Bureau. The proposed organizational work for this meeting has been developed pursuant to the mandate given by the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties. They subsequently considered and reviewed the proposed organizational work contained in the provisional agenda with supplementary annotations. For our resume meeting and its relationship to the resume meeting of SAPSTA and the working group, the Executive Secretary, in consultation with the two Bureau, prepared a proposed organizational work, which is provided in the annex to a joint scenario note and contained in document CBD-SBI-3 1 Add 2 Rev 2. So I would like to suggest that in order to make efficient use of time and to allow more time for discussions, we refrain from making individual statements to thank or congratulate the chair or our host or the secretariat. Following on from the first part of our meeting, we need to formally adopt the recommendation contained in 5 L documents that was already approved in the first part of our meeting, continue our work on 11 CRPs and develop them into LDocs for formal adoption, and resume our first reading on agenda item 8, as well on new elements items 5 and 6 arising from intersessional work. In this respect, I would also like to draw your attention to some new documents for consideration under agenda items 5, 6, as well as agenda item 9. The meeting will be a mixture of plenary and contact group meetings. You will recall that we established a number of contact groups during the first part of our meeting, and they will continue their work at this meeting. Distinguished delegates, we have a complex meeting ahead of us and limited amount of time. To facilitate progress, I would like to review the plan for each of our substantive agenda items. For agenda item 3, review progress in implementation of a convention and the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020. The SBI considered this item and approved a draft recommendation at its third part of the meeting, contained in document CBD-SBI-3 L4. We will consider this L document for adoption during one of our later SBI plenary sessions, but as this recommendation is already an L document, I do not intend to reopen the discussion. For agenda item 4, assessment and review of effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, the SBI considered this item and approved a draft recommendation contained in document CBD-SBI-3 L2. We will consider this L document for formal adoption during one of our later SBI plenary sessions, and also as this recommendation is already an L document, I do not intend to reopen the discussion. For agenda item 5, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As you will recall, there were numerous issues being considered under this agenda item. We were able to prepare 2 conference papers under this item as a result of our deliberation at SBI, part 1 of SBI-3. The first of these CRPs is CBD-SBI-3 CRP 9 on other matters related to a post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And as you can see, in the footnotes of recommended draft decision for COP in this CRP, 2 further documents were to be prepared, namely Gender Plan of Action for the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and a Framework for Communication Strategy. As a result of this intersessional work, we have 2 new documents to consider under this agenda item during part 2 of our meeting. And that is document SBI-3 for Add to Rev 2 on the draft post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. We will consider this document later in this plenary session, time permitting. The other new document is CBD-SBI-3 for Add 1 Rev 1 on communication for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And the communication strategy is planned to be discussed in the SBI plenary on Friday, 18th March. The second CRP we prepared under agenda item 5 at the first part of our meeting was CBD-SBI-3 CRP 14 on the post-2020 implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol. This CRP reflects the outcomes of the work of a contact group that met during part 1 of the meeting. We will continue to have discussions on this CRP in a resumed contact group in an attempt to resolve brackets. The resumed contact group will again be co-chaired by Ms. Rita Andorko from Hungary and Mr. Rigobert Netep from Cameroon. The group should focus its work on 2 issues: indicators and actors in the table with the capacity building action plan, and the question of whether the plan should be adopted in one decision or 2. A session of a contact group is currently planned for 23rd March at 7:30 p.m. I also understand that the co-chairs is planning to issue non-paper in the coming days to help delegates to prepare for the discussion in the contact group. For agenda item 6, resource mobilization and the financial mechanism, the first part of SBI-3 produced a draft recommendation on resource mobilization contained in document CBD-SBI-3 CRP 15 and will further consider the recommendation at this meeting. In addition, the first part of SBI-3 also produced a draft recommendation on the financial mechanism contained in document CBD-SBI-3 L3, which we'll adopt at this meeting. Also, The SBI will elaborate additional elements for a draft COP decision, taking into account a number of additional documents. And we will address this matter later at this plenary session, and there you will give more details, provide more details. I envisage also that the contact group for this agenda item that was established at the first part of SBI-3 will continue its work at this meeting. For agenda item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management and communication, the first part of SBI-3 produced draft recommendations on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer contained in document CBD, SBI-3, CRP 13. Knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism contained in CBD, SBI-3, CRP 4. Communication contained in document CBD, SBI-3, L5, and evaluation of a strategic framework for capacity building and development support for effective implementation of a Nagoya Protocol contained in document CBD, SBI-3, CRP 6. We will consider and approve CRP 4 and 6 during one of our next plenary sessions. In addition, we will consider L5 on communications for adoption during one of our later SBI plenary meetings. And also for this one, as this recommendation is or an L document, we do not intend to devote time in plenary for further discussion. However, I do encourage delegates to meet informally to help resolve outstanding issues so that we can eliminate some of the brackets before we formally adopt this recommendation. With regard to CRP 13, given that a number of square brackets still need to be resolved, the contact group I established during the first part of the meeting, co-chaired by Mr. Hayo Hanstra from the Netherlands and Ms. Laura Bermudez of Colombia, will continue its work to resolving these issues. The contact group will have 2 meetings, and the first meeting is planned to be held on Wednesday, the 16th of March. For agenda item 8, cooperation with other conventions, international organizations and initiatives, we will hold a resumed first reading for this agenda item during the SBI plenary on Friday, 18th March. For agenda item 9, mechanism for reporting, assessment and review implementation, the first part of SBI-3 produced a draft recommendation on a mechanism for reporting which is contained in document CBD, SBI-3, CRP 5. The draft CRP made references to 4 annexes. However, only Annex C on national reporting was available and considered during the plenary in SBI Part 1. As requested by the first part of the meeting, the Secretariat has developed drafts for the other 3 annexes, and these were made available as addenda for information on delegates at the present meeting. The contact group for this agenda item was established during the first part of SBI-3 and will continue its work at this meeting with the co-chairs of Mr. Andrew Stott of United Kingdom and Ms. Gillian Goofy of Jamaica. And the contact group will have 3 meetings, and the first meeting is planned to be held on Tuesday, 15th March. For the following items, agenda item 10, review effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols. Agenda item 11, mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors and other strategic actions to enhance implementation. Agenda item 13, Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism, Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol. The first part of SBI-3 produced draft recommendations. We will consider the draft recommendations for these agenda items during a later SBI plenary meeting, and please check the schedule and see when it will be planned to be discussed. For agenda item 12, specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4, Paragraph 4 of the Nagoya Protocol. The first part of SBI-3 considered this item and approved a draft recommendation containing document CBD-SBI-3 L6. We will consider this L document for adoption during one of our later SBI plenary meetings. And as this recommendation is already an L document, we do not intend to devote time in plenary for further discussions. Regarding agenda item 14, we completed our consideration of this agenda item and accordingly will not address this item in this meeting. Accordingly, I have reconvened the contact groups that were established during the first part of the meeting on item 5, post-2020 Global University Framework, with regards to the Cartagena Protocol for the post-2020 Implementation Plan and Capacity Building Action Plan for the Cartagena Protocol. Item 6 on resource mobilization and financial mechanisms. Item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management and communication. And on item 9 on mechanisms for reporting, assessment and review implementation. I would now like to say a few words about the operation of the contact groups. Contact group sessions will last up to 3 hours. Up to 3 sessions of different groups can be scheduled per day. They will meet either from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., or from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. local time in Geneva. No contact groups of either SAPSTA or SBI will run in parallel with those of Working Group 2020 contact groups. Up to 2 SAPSTA and SBI contact groups in total can run in parallel. The contact groups are open to participation by all parties, other governments and representatives of observers. The usual practice and rules will apply to participation observers. They may speak at the discretion of the co-chairs and be given the floor after parties speak, and any substantive proposal from observer must be supported by at least one party. As per usual practice, these sessions cannot be recorded or shared through social media. The contact groups will work in English, and accordingly non-paper considered at the meetings of a group are in English. Per usual practice, the outcomes of the work of the contact groups will be provided as CRP in all languages for consideration by the plenary. It is my hope that each contact group will use, its limited time effectively and to conclude the mandate given to the contact groups. But I'm confident that we all will help each other to use the time available in the best way. So it was a lengthy presentation of the organizational work. I hope that this is acceptable. And so if I may ask if there are any objections to the proposed organizational work, and maybe the Secretariat can help me. I see that Brazil has asked for the floor. Can Brazil please give the floor to Brazil?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil would like to thank you and thank the Secretariat for preparing the additional documents that have been uploaded in the CBD webpage, and we wish you a rapid recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Brazil believes that the success of this resumed session of SBI will depend on its capacity to make progress on key issues that will support the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, Brazil remains deeply concerned about the limited time allocated for discussions on Agenda Item 6 on resource mobilization, in particular CRP 15, which will provide significant inputs for the resource mobilization component of the new framework. Brazil understands that focusing on documents such as the 4-year plan of the GEF or the working group on indicators on resource mobilization may divert our efforts from the priority topics that need to be addressed if we are to achieve a common understanding on how to fund the GBF. Brazil would also like to express its deep appreciation to China for proposing the establishment of the coming Biodiversity Fund during the first part of COP15, which we believe moves us in the right direction towards creating a dedicated and permanent multilateral fund for biodiversity under the provision of Article 21. Brazil would like to announce that we will submit 2 non-papers on resource mobilization. One of them addresses the implementation of Article 21 of the Convention and the establishment of a multilateral fund for biodiversity, which should build on the lessons learned from the Global Environmental Facility and the Green Climate Fund. The other non-paper seeks to address ecosystem services, highlighting the importance of payments for environmental services schemes as an essential financial mechanism to foster the monetary valuation of conservation, restoration, sustainable management, and use activities, and in doing so, engage as many stakeholders as possible in the protection of biodiversity. We would like to request that both non-papers be included for consideration under Agenda Item 6 on resource mobilization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brazil, for your statement. So, if I go back to my question about the organizational work, I understand that organization work is acceptable. Secretary will help me. If somebody has, yeah. So I see no objections. So the organizational work is agreed. Distinguished delegates, we have now completed item 2 of our agenda, and we will now take up our next agenda item. And thank you, delegates, for your understanding. I am looking forward to joining you in person once I have completed my required quarantine period. But for now, I would like to hand over chairing responsibilities for the rest of this meeting. And I would like to hand over to the COP Bureau member, Ms. Gabriele Obermeier-Austria. So Gabriele, I hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And before I take you through Agenda Item 6 and Agenda Item 5, let me start by saying that we all look forward to having you back here in the room with us in person and wishing you a speedy recovery. Look forward to see you at the end of this week, Charlotta. Distinguished delegates, let us now turn to Agenda Item 6, Resource Mobilization and the Financial Mechanism. Colleagues, you will recall that the SBI considered Agenda Item 6 at the second plenary session of Part 1 of its 3rd meeting. We also established a contact group to advance the work under this agenda item. With the assistance of the contact group, the SBI chair prepared 2 draft recommendations. The SBI also approved the draft recommendation on the financial mechanism contained in document SBI-3 L3, but decided to defer consideration of the draft recommendation on resource mobilization contained in document SBI-3 CRP 15. We also have some new documents developed in light of our work in the first part of our meeting. I would now like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the relevant documents related to this agenda item for this meeting and to highlight the intersessional work that has been done under this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. To assist with the further consideration for agenda item on financial mechanism, the Secretariat has prepared two working documents. CBD SBI-3 682 Rev 1, executive summary of a report of a full assessment of funds needed for implementation of a convention and its protocol during the 8th replenishment period of the Global Environment Facility. That's July 2022 to June 2026. The full report is contained in information document CBD SBI 3 Info 44. The second document is CBD SBI 3 684, draft proposals for a 4-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities for the 8th replenishment period of GF Trust Fund. There are also two new information documents to inform your deliberations. CBD SBI 3 Info 43. Additional submissions received from biodiversity-related conventions pursuant to paragraph 9 of decision 1321. CBD/SBI/3/info/45, aligning the COP guidance to the GEF with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. These documents were introduced by the Secretariat through the webinar that was organized on 24th February 2022. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Let me now invite delegates to take the floor on the new documents for agenda item 6 on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism. I would like to remind delegates to focus their comments on the new documents, as we have already heard interventions on all other documents in May last year. I will now open the floor for statements from regions on the new documents. I recognize the European Union. You have the floor, Madam.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Concerning the document L3, we expect that it can be adopted and presented to the Conference of the Parties if so decided, but there is a reference in the document that it was not discussed in 2021 during our virtual sessions. We believe that this paragraph can be adopted at this resumed session before it is finally adopted by the Conference of the Parties. Concerning the document SBI-3 L6 addendum, concerning financing. After the only existing mechanism for financing, 30 years later, it is not sufficient to achieve the objectives of the CBD Convention. If the parties wish to present specific amendments, that can be done to the text by presenting amendments to the text of the decision that is added to the document. And we would welcome written proposals. Our proposal is as follows. The European Union and its member states encourage the mechanism to improve its effectiveness and visibility, especially for the vulnerable countries, namely the least developed ones and the developing island countries. This could contribute to the implementation of the post-2020 GBF and the preparation of the national plans for biodiversity. This mechanism, FEM, could improve the synergies with the Rio and other similar conventions and other processes connected to durable, sustainable development. This concerns also the Green Climate Fund, the CIFs, the AF, and the LDCF. The adoption of the definition of nature-based solutions at the second General Assembly session is an important step forward in fostering such synergies and making sure that support for NBS is based on a common understanding of the essence and benefits of NBS in order to promote further its successful implementation and avoid misuse of the term. We propose that Jeff will further interact and cooperate with multilateral development banks and other public and private financial institutions in order to raise awareness on the relevance to integrate the post-2020 GBF goals and targets within their activities and report on funding contributing to their implementation. We recognize the efforts by the GEF to engage with the private sector in funding for biodiversity and encourage Jeff to strengthen this work as part of the GEF8 cycle. We recognize the important efforts by Jeff concerning SGP flagship, which provides funding, including to indigenous peoples and local communities. Community-based organization as well as civil society, including women organizations representing women, youth, and persons with disabilities. We invite the GEF to mainstream biodiversity in all GEF's activities and to provide regular reporting on biodiversity co-benefits, including through strengthening qualitative and quantitative measurement of biodiversity-related impacts and outcomes of projects. Now, concerning documents CBD/SBI/3/6/Addendum 2 Revision 1, the European Union and its member states thank the authors of the report, which benefited from funding from Sweden and the European Union. We note the publication of the report, but regret the low rate of response to the questionnaire used as a basis for this report. Despite the extended period offered for replying, as well as the call for response from the European Union member states and other parties that was expressed during the SBI third session last year. Only 44 out of the 145 GEF recipient countries replied to the questionnaire. We, however, understand that the COVID-19 related situation could have had an impact on the low rate of response. We believe that this low rate of response has induced significant methodological challenges and negatively impacted the robustness of the three scenarios as presented in the report. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Franz, on behalf of the European Union and its member states. I do not see any further requests for the floor from regions on my screen. So that's why now I will turn to parties, and I invite parties to take the floor on these agenda items. And please be reminded, you have 3 minutes for your interventions. I see Argentina. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to wish the chair to get well soon. We would like to use this opportunity to touch upon two questions. First, it concerns our proposals on item 6. Second, we would like to touch upon the discussion of this important issue at this present session concerning document CBD-SBI-3/6/addendum 4, a draft proposals for the program issues under GBF that concerns certain targets and goals that have not been yet agreed upon. We're surprised by reference to the approach to biodiversity, which has not been agreed upon yet. Concerning document 3/5/addenda 4, concerning a possible expert working group concerning financial report, we believe that this group should concentrate on objective 19 or target 19. Thus, we will not refer to methodologies of organizations that are not universal or refer to other decisions yet to be taken by COP. Now, we have presented written proposals, and I'd like to touch upon subject 3 at this session. Argentina believes, in accordance with what was mentioned by our colleague from Brazil, this would be reflected in CRP 15 of our subsidiary body. Here at Geneva, we should finalize this document as far as possible. We need a significant advance concerning resource mobilization with specific commitments concerning food in accordance with Article 20. Distinguished delegates, steps in this direction are the steps that we must take during these weeks, which is indispensable to achieve confidence and progress on the GBF. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Argentina. I now recognize Canada. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Canada strongly supports the Global Environmental Facility as the financial mechanism for the Convention. we are actively participating in the GEF-8 replenishment negotiations, and we're encouraged by the widespread support from donors and representatives of recipient countries to significantly increase GEF resources for biodiversity through focal area and integrated programming investments and for alignment with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe that this builds positive momentum on resource mobilization for an ambitious Global Biodiversity Framework. On the new documents introduced to SBI-3, first, we support the EU statement on the limitations of document 6/add2. And on the other document, we generally support the draft 4-year programming framework under 6/add.4 and appreciate the work that has gone into its development. We suggest that SBI-3 engage in preliminary discussions of this framework with a full discussion at COP15 to confirm CBD COP guidance to the GEF and to ensure that GEF-8 programming in fact aligns with the Global Biodiversity Framework that will be adopted at COP15. We have some suggestions for the framework, including greater clarity is needed on the matrix in paragraph 2, such as to ensure no duplication with GEF reporting to the COP. Recognize that GEF is an important source of CBD funding, but resources will also be needed from all sources for an ambitious global biodiversity framework. We propose 2 additional paragraphs, an 8 bis to promote nature-based solutions as a cross-cutting priority using the multilateral agreed definition of nature-based solutions established recently at UNEA 5, and an 11 bis to enhance engagement with the private sector, another cross-cutting priority of GEF-8. Finally, encourage GEF-8 programs and projects be designed to achieve triple benefits through nature-positive, carbon-neutral, and pollution-free outcomes. Canada will provide all of our suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Canada. I now give the floor to Switzerland. Madam, you have the floor.
Dear Madam Chair, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the additional documents for the first in-person SBA session after the pandemic. We share the view of the EU and Canada that the GEF is the only financial mechanism under the Convention and welcome the expected increase in biodiversity under the new replenishment in GEF-8. Regarding the documents in front of us, Switzerland welcomes the L document, including the tour of the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. And we support that the document is not reopened. We expect that the contained paragraphs and the terms of reference will be merged with the SBI session decision elements and draft recommendation to the COP in this SBI session before passing everything on to the COP. We also take note of the report on the full assessment of the funds needed for the implementation of the Convention and its protocol during GEF-8 and the 3 scenarios and resulting funding needs. However, we also regret that only about 40% recipients have submitted their investment and funding needs under the financial mechanism. Finally, we welcome the suggested draft recommendation and draft proposal for a 4-year outcome-oriented framework of programming priorities for the 8th replenishment period. In light of the advancement of the GEF-8 replenishment process and the delays in the Convention process under the negotiations of the post-20 GBF, we agree with the proposed simple format. Nevertheless, we consider the draft recommendation and the 4-year framework an important part of the guidance to the financial mechanism and therefore suggest its inclusion in the final documents, which we will pass on to COP15. We will provide our specific comments to the draft recommendation and the 4-year framework in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Switzerland, for your contribution. I now see Costa Rica on my screen, followed by Japan. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Costa Rica is committed to an exhaustive review of the documents for SBI, especially concerning the financing mechanism and its bringing into accord with the post-2020 FBF. We would like to focus on the importance that the GF can operate a dependable monitoring system that would be accepted by all recipient and donor countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. I give the floor now to Japan, followed by Bolivia. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this document on the heels of the recent 8th replenishment negotiations of the Global Environmental Facility. In light of the tight schedule, we agree with the view that it would be more prudent to allocate more time to the proposal for a 4-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities for the 8th replenishment of the GEF, document SBI-3/6/add.4, that was most recently released, in addition to the resource mobilization strategy piece. In particular, with the financial mechanism, it's important because the programming directions document should stem from a clear guidance from the convention in time for the...
Your mic is off. Sorry, madam.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so we think that it's important that this programming directions document should stem from clear guidance from the convention in time of the GEF 8 pledge sessions. We agree with the views already voiced by Switzerland, Canada, and the EU, so we'll not repeat the same points here, but we certainly endorse those views. We observe that the document also still does not reflect the most recent outcomes of the replenishment discussions, such as the most recent financial scenarios and proposed allocation for the biodiversity focal area. So we would like to request these to be updated as soon as possible during this meeting for all parties' view. We think that it's critically important for the 4-year framework of programming priorities to reflect the importance of GEF assistance to enabling conditions required for the implementation of the new framework. In that regard, we think that the programming priorities should be inclusive to reflect all aspects of the GBF, not just some parts of it. In that regard, we reiterate our request to replace all general references of biodiversity-related conventions to biodiversity-related agreements, especially in draft resolution and its annex, to capture the full spectrum of GBF and to not implicitly assign hierarchies among the MEAs. This proposed language would also be in alignment with the existing L3 document on the financial mechanism and consistent with the document SBI-3/6, which cites the importance of synergies among relevant multilateral environmental agreements and other relevant international processes, including through the strengthening of establishment of cooperation mechanisms, as mentioned in paragraph 35C, which we request to add to the last paragraph of the draft resolution in paragraph 3E. We also note that this would be in alignment with the overwhelming request by parties on the matter under Agenda Item 8 on cooperation. We also highlight the importance of GEF in its 8th replenishment period, given the structural uncertainty in the financial landscape, to explore ways to significantly improve access to funding to those that are most vulnerable, including the LDCs and SIDS, which have limited access to external capital, technical capability, and inability to self-fund, and may have a particular need for support in this post-pandemic environment. Thank you very much, and we will submit our detailed comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. And before I give the floor to Bolivia, the Secretariat would like to make an announcement. Secretariat, please.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to be a problem with the system, so if you are unable to press and get the green button as you're supposed to, please just raise your flag and we will find you. We have a list of some of the people that we have seen, so thank you. Just raise your flag and we'll see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. So now I give the floor to Bolivia, followed by the Russian Federation. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. We, Bolivia, would like to emphasize the importance of the decision on the mobilization of resources. However, we would like to state our disaccord, our lack of agreement with the statements concerning prioritization in the mobilization of resources, concerning nature-based decisions, ecosystem services, or any payment for environmental services. For Bolivia, decisions that are nature-based are an instrument and a mechanism to find environmental solutions in favor of Mother Nature, and we resolutely are in favor. To us, it's a sacrosanct resource. Our Mother Nature must be respected and promoted to avoid commercialization of nature for the benefit of human beings, and we reject resolutely the incorporation of nature-based decisions in other decisions concerning resource mobilization or any other related decision. In our turn, we, Bolivia, believe that prioritization of the mobilization of resources must be focused on the search for environmental decisions in favor of Mother Nature, that focus on Mother Nature and based on rights-based decisions that must be respected in any distribution of resources. We must also state that this decision must be discussed again on the basis of that any decision must be framed in accordance with equity, equitability, in accordance with the content of the CBD, and we believe that it contains a central principle concerning shared but differentiated responsibilities. We understand that rhetorics concerning some kind of functional environmentalism based on capitalism would lead to conceptual errors that would pay little attention to specific responsibility, making the disfavored countries paid a disproportionate share of the price for the lack of environmental protection. That's why we believe that any decision on financial mechanism must be based on shared but differentiated responsibilities, and we will present our proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Bolivia. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation, followed by United Kingdom and Brazil. Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
I thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, GEF, the Global Environmental Fund, has been decided as the financial mechanism of CBD in accordance with Article 21 of this convention. These articles are mandatory and their implementation must not be blocked by some countries in a unilateral action. We have noted since a number of years that Article 21 has been violated by some countries, and a number of CBD member parties have suffered because of this, which diminished their capacity to implement the goals contained in CBD. GEF representatives are present in this room, and we hope they know about these violations, and we hope that they will take every step to reestablish Article 21 and its implementation, and the resumption of the function of the GEF as a sustainable replenishment mechanism for CBD goals, we must make the following statement. We believe it should be included in the final report of this session. I'm going to read it out in English.
All CBD parties to fully implement the Convention and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, it's essential to make effective and full use of the Convention's financial mechanism in full accordance with the Article 21 of the Convention. All countries entitled to use Global Environment Facility funding must have full access to its resources through project cycle as per the established rules and not on the basis of unilateral bias political decision outside the GEF. The application of the punitive restriction with respect to the number of the CBD parties threatens the very integrity and the future of the Convention itself at its full implementation. В соответствии с этим
Accordingly, the paragraph 4 of the preamble of document CBD/SBI/3/L.3, after the words Conference of the Parties, we would propose to add the following.
Importance of the full application of provisions of the Article 21 and access to the financial mechanism for all eligible parties for full implementation of the Convention. Full stop. Спасибо.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. We would present our proposals in writing.
Thank you, Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the United Kingdom, followed by Brazil and Palestine. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The UK would like to thank the panel of experts on resource mobilisation for their work on the evaluation and review of the strategy for resource mobilisation and estimating the resources needed for implementation of the post-2020 GBF. We also recognise that there's considerable work that remains to be done on document CRP 15, and we look forward to doing that while we're all here at this meeting. But at this stage, we will focus our attention on the two documents that are on the table for the agenda. We thank the Secretariat for preparing and providing the new documents regarding the financial mechanism. We note with concern the lack of response to the questionnaire on funding needs for GEF8 and urge parties of the importance of this data to accurately support implementation of the post-2020 GBF. We also thank the Secretariat for the draft proposals for a 4-year outcome-oriented framework for the GEF8 replenishment and have the following comments for strengthening these. We would like to see stronger reference to co-benefits with other focal areas, interaction and cooperation with all GEF agencies, improved access to funding for all recipient countries, but particularly for the most vulnerable, such as LDCs and SIDS, and better engagement with the private sector. We look forward to further discussions on these with parties within the scheduled contact group. We note that the GEF is a high-performing fund. It has consistently performed well in project completion reports of previous replenishments, consistently scoring A for the programme overall. Under GEF 7, the largest proportion of funding went to biodiversity at 31%. In the GEF 8 replenishment negotiations, a number of donors have expressed maintaining significant finance for biodiversity. In accordance with Article 21, the Conference of the Parties will undertake its next review into the effectiveness of the GEF at COP16 and take any appropriate action to improve the effectiveness of the GEF as necessary. At COP15, parties will agree the terms of reference for this. The UK supports the GEF as the only agreed financial mechanism for the Convention and its protocols and eagerly awaits the review at COP16. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, United Kingdom. Brazil, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again for giving me the floor. And we'd like to thank once again the Secretariat for preparing the additional documents that have been circulated. Regarding document CBD/SBI/3/6/Ed4 on the 4-year outcome-oriented framework, Brazil believes that this document should consider in a balanced manner the three pillars of the Convention. We share the concerns raised by the distinguished colleague from Argentina regarding the fact that many elements referred to in the annex of the present document are yet to be discussed. Therefore, we still need to understand how many of the elements, such as mainstreaming, would actually relate to the activities of the JEF. We also believe that the document shall not introduce concepts that prejudge the best policy options that parties to the Convention should implement, further reaffirming that resources from the JEF should be granted on a country-driven basis. Regarding document CBD-SBI-3/5/4 on the financial reporting framework, it is crucial that the working group develops an enhanced, transparent financial framework to assess the implementation of Articles 20 and 21 of the Convention, by which developed country parties shall provide quantitative and qualitative information related to the provision of financial resources to assist developing countries in meeting the incremental costs of the implementation of the Convention and the post-2020 GBF as applicable, including, where available, projected levels of public financial resources to be provided to developing country parties. We will submit our proposals in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brazil. I now give the floor to Palestine, followed by Egypt. Palestine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Although JEF is the only financing fund for CBD, it doesn't have a clear standard. For example, in Palestine, we are banned. We are not receiving any funds because of political purposes. You know very well that the implementation of CBD is a mere technical issue that has nothing to do with politics. Therefore, Article 6 should be amended in such a way that JEF should provide the required financing to all countries that require such financing without any political background reasons, and therefore JEF should help all the countries in such a way that they can implement this convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Australia. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Egypt would like to thank the Secretariat for the excellent documents that already prepared. From our side, it is clear that for decades, global conventions and international organizations have urged countries to increase their spending on biodiversity to fulfill the funding gaps and stop the degradation of natural resources. Nevertheless, this effort did not succeed in fulfilling this funding gap, and most countries are struggling to provide the required fund for their conservation activities. Madam Chair, increasing the financial resources dedicated to biodiversity is indeed a challenging decision, considering many factors that play a significant role in this regard. The level of spending on biodiversity activities is affected by positively or negatively by several biodiversity, demographics, economics, and institutional variables. The magnitude of the effect differs from one factor to another. Accordingly, it is significant to understand the effect of these factors to be able to tackle this funding challenge from its root. As confirmed by very recent studies, governance plays a major role in the mobilization of financial resources to biodiversity conservation. Almost all governance variables can affect biodiversity spending positively. It is estimated that 1 unit increase in government effectiveness and regulatory framework quality score can be associated with more than 480% increase in spending. Having said this, it means that the more the nation is directed and controlled, the more it gives attention to its natural resources. Surprisingly, some studies have found that increase in foreign aid has not led to an increase in financial resources allocated for biodiversity conservation activities. The reason might be because of the tendency of some countries to reduce the local financial support to biodiversity when they receive foreign aid. They redirect their domestic financial resources to fund other priorities and count on foreign aid to fund their natural conservation activities. To some, the scaling up of spending for the conservation of natural resources does not necessarily be through directly investing in nature conservation activities. There are other means to do so that might be more sustainable and can take us to the desired long-term effect. Assisting countries to strengthen their governance practices and policies is an efficient and sustainable way to stop degradation of natural resources rather than directly investing in biodiversity. Dedicating more effort toward strengthening the effectiveness of government and quality of regulation might take more countries better suited to fulfill their biodiversity funding gap. Receiving foreign aid does not appear to be desirable.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir, but please could you come to an end? You have already exceeded 3 minutes.
Right.
Please, sir.
Receiving foreign aid does not appear to be desirable characteristic per se in scaling up financial resources. Therefore, the amount of aid received should not be counted as an advantage toward closing biodiversity funding. It is recommended that donors should ensure that their funding is utilized appropriately and without a reduction in domestic resources. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Egypt and distinguished delegates. I have to remind us that you have 3 minutes for your interventions, and please stick to these 3 minutes. That allows us to take more interventions from parties and from observers under this agenda item. I now give the floor to Australia, followed by Colombia and Mexico. Australia, Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Australia recognises the need for increased, predictable and timely flows of financial resources to support implementation of an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Australia sees biodiversity conservation as a shared responsibility, and meeting the resource requirements for the full and effective implementation of the framework cannot be achieved by the public sector alone. A concerted effort must be made to mobilise resources from all sources, recognising the important role that the private sector, financing institutions and civil society can play and are increasingly playing in achieving the objectives of the Convention. Australia notes that decisions over domestic implementation remain the sovereign right of parties, including decisions over plans for domestic resourcing. So while we acknowledge the value that national biodiversity finance plans offer as a practical means of supporting domestic biodiversity conservation efforts through the efficient allocation of resources, it is appropriate for national biodiversity finance plans to be voluntary. Australia is a committed supporter of the Global Environment Facility as the sole financial mechanism for the Convention. We look forward to seeing future funding being allocated to projects that target a range of CBD targets, as opposed to focusing on a specific few, noting developing countries have responsibility for determining the activities that they would like funded. And we note the particular needs of SIDS and LDCs. We also note that the GEF8 replenishment process is very close to concluding. We would therefore not support discussions relating to GEF8 allocations being reopened for discussion during this item. Reviewing the effectiveness of the GEF is key to ensuring resources are delivering intended outcomes. We note that a number of criteria presented in the terms of reference of the review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism require further clarification. We support calls from others for language changes from biodiversity-related conventions to biodiversity-related agreements to cover all relevant multilateral environmental agreements. We look forward to constructive negotiations during the remainder of this SBI session. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Australia. And distinguished delegates, I also would like to remind you not to forget to upload your statements in the system. I now give the floor to Colombia, followed by Mexico. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Colombia has the following comments about the report that has been submitted by the group of experts contracted by the CBD. We also note with concern that only 44 out of the 145 countries have filled in the questionnaire about financial needs. As a result, the three scenarios might underestimate or not adequately reflect the global needs picture. And so along these lines, I think it's relevant to stress that the financial requirements for the conservation, for sustainable use, and for replenishment of biodiversity and its ecosystem services may vary from one region to another, given the fact that different ecosystems are affected differently, geographical particularities, meteorological specificities, among other variables. And in this context, according to OPS 7, Latin America is making a significant contribution to global environmental benefits. These estimates must take into account that the global framework and its monitoring framework will carry with them new obligations in terms of conservation, sustainable use, and replenishment, as well as national processes to update the NB-SAP, among which should be ensuring the consistency between the ambitions of the new framework and the projections for financial mechanism. Therefore, we believe that scenarios 1 and 2 would not be acceptable as a basis to determine the financial necessity of the parties. Scenario 3 has some additional elements. However, we are at a very critical moment for biodiversity, which means that it needs more resources. Therefore, we consider that scenario 3 might offer a focus which is broader, more realistic, taking into account lessons learned on the Aichi targets, which we did not have, where we did not have the tools and so on, which affected to a great extent its fulfillment. It's evident that the success which GEF has had as a financial mechanism, CBD, was reflected in the efficiency of the fulfillment of the indicators in the generation of synergies, promotion of mobility of resources in all sources. We welcome the 6th study of the global results, which indicates that the results accumulated are 80% of all projects have been certified as qualified as satisfactory. We reiterate the concern about the adoption of the GEF 8, and in facing this scenario, the CDD parties must make sure that the high ambition of the objective of the goals and targets are in accordance with the efforts for mobilization of resources in all sources under the leadership of the developed countries and aimed at developing countries as receptors, including megadiverse ones. The criteria for international cooperation for the access to financial resources, concessional ones, by countries must be based on the GDP. Therefore, it's fundamentally important that the criteria for the mechanism, the STAR mechanism, should remain without any modifications at all, avoiding distinctions between different groups of countries and developing countries attending to the mandate of the COP. As far as the 4-year programmatic priorities, we shall be making comments about this during the session of the contact group, and we'll send in these proposals in writing. Among these, we'd like to point out our support for what was expressed by Canada based on the inclusion of solutions which are based in nature-based solutions as a priority for financing. And I thank you for your attention, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Colombia. Next on my list is Mexico, followed by Venezuela. Mexico, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Taking into account that we will present our proposals in writing, we would like to make a general presentation. As we have heard, there is a considerable preoccupation and concern about the mobilization of resources and the way the subject is being discussed. We would like to achieve an ambitious post-2020 GBF. We cannot go without a debate on the resources for our implementation. We shouldn't politicize this subject, as well as the projects that are in favor of biodiversity financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mexico. I now give the floor to Venezuela, followed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Venezuela.
Gracias.
Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the floor. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the documents about the financial mechanism. However, I think it's crucial to establish a mechanism which is transparent so that it can be used effectively and efficiently in accordance with Article 21, and that one should guarantee full access to these resources in accordance with the rules that have already been established and not on the basis of political decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Venezuela. Iran, you have the floor, followed by Namibia.
In the name of God, the Islamic Republic of Iran would first like to express its thanks to the CBD co-chairs and Secretariat for all the progress that has been made to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and also the government of Switzerland for hosting this important meeting. The Islamic Republic of Iran expresses its support to the ongoing post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. By sure, more concrete and rigid decisions must be made to stop the current losses to biodiversity and putting it back to the right path of conservation and restoration. However, there are some important points that must be taken into consideration for successful implementation of this framework, especially with regard to the resource mobilization. 1. Fulfillment of the ambitious goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF are not easy for developing countries, and they are in some cases impossible if special supports are not available to these countries. 2. The expectation from developing countries with regard to the post-2020 GBF shall match with the capacities and infrastructure available in these countries. 3. The Islamic Republic of Iran suggests the formation of a global biodiversity fund in order to streamline the financial support to the developing countries in support of successful implementation of the post-2020 GBF. 4. Transfer of technology as one of the resources shall be eased and monitored from developed to developing countries in support of implementation of the post-2020 GBF. 5. Biodiversity is not limited to borders, and the degree to which a country can implement the post-2020 GBF impacts biodiversity status at global scale. Following this principle, the illegal and unilateral sanctions against some countries, such as the Islamic Republic of Iran, must be removed so that the country can activate its national capacities and also can take the advantage of financial support available to developing countries for building the necessary capacities to achieve the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF. And at the end, the GEF shall act irrespective of any political pressure by some countries. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Islamic Republic of Iran. I now give the floor to Namibia, followed by Bosnia and Herzegovina. Namibia, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Namibia would like to reiterate and emphasize a few key considerations about resource mobilization that have previously also been expressed by the African group. Well, this is not a statement on behalf of Africa. Firstly, we expect a firm commitment on resource mobilization before the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework. commensurate with the level of ambition agreed in other targets, and vice versa. To put that in another way, we will only agree to levels of ambition in the framework that we can realistically expect to be funded. No unfunded commitments. We tried that in Aichi and it has turned out really badly for biodiversity. Secondly, we would like to reiterate that fair and equitable benefit sharing as an incentive for sustainable use is the only guaranteed way to achieve good conservation outcomes in the long run. We expect that benefit sharing through a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism will be included among the sources that are included in the often invoked funding from all sources. Considering the fiscal constraints being experienced by developed countries, which will likely be made even worse in the near future by increased military spending, we consider it is imperative to have a stable long-term source of dedicated funding, such as a 1% biodiversity levy on all retail sales in developed countries of products derived from biodiversity. Thirdly, while we would welcome the elimination of harmful subsidies, we are not optimistic about this actually being achieved. It was one of the most spectacular failures of Aichi, with harmful subsidies almost doubling over the 10-year period. Ending harm is necessary, but it's not the same as healing. We remain skeptical about the potential contribution of so-called nature-based solutions, although we accept that the recently agreed UNEA definition somewhat reduces the danger of this ending in carbon colonialism. Let's see how that works out, and we take comfort in the fact that project proponents would in all cases have to comply with national legislation and standards. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Namibia. Next on my list is Bosnia-Herzegovina, followed by the Democratic Republic of Congo. Bosnia-Herzegovina, you have the floor.
Hi. Distinguished Chair, Secretariat, and dear delegates, we would like to highlight one thing. In line with the document SBI-3 we would like to highlight the importance of the problems that most of the countries with economy with transitions are facing in the implementation of biodiversity strategies. We believe that it is necessary that all country groups listed in the document that deals with resources for the implementation of GBF in the next period. In a decision up to now, phrase that relates to this is not always unified. Sometimes they are listed in the group of developing countries, while in the other decisions are listed as a separate group. However, in the decision of these conventions are basis for the financial support to this group of countries. We would like to highlight that eligibility criteria adopted in line with this convention are enabling to these countries with economies in transition much needed financial help. Bosnia-Herzegovina strongly believes that all eligible countries should be specifically listed in the document that relate to the financial mechanism and the resource mobilization in order to take appropriate role in achieving the goals of global biodiversity framework. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Madam. I now give the floor to the Democratic Republic of Congo, followed by Sudan. Congo, you have the floor.
Merci. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. The DRC would also like to offer a few comments about this issue. The DRC would like to begin by thanking the bureaus for the additional documents on this very critical issue. This business about the use of resources has to be dealt with in a very serious manner, to be sure. And for the time being, we have to be able to assess the cost of the implementation of the global framework post-2020 to avoid errors which have led to the fact that a number of the targets of the Aichi were not reached, taking into account the lessons in which the World Environment Fund, Global Environment Fund is used. We think that one which is devoted to biodiversity should be put in place and accessible to developing countries, and a major portion of the funds should be effected to transfer capacity building, promotion of initiatives, conservation, indigenous peoples, local communities. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Democratic Republic of Congo. I now recognize Sudan, followed by India. Sudan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sudan would like to extend its thanks to the Secretariat for the preparations and the facilitation concerning the issuance of the various documents for the SBI. We would like to thank the government of Switzerland for hosting this meeting. Sudan would like to welcome the GBF for the post-2020 period, but in order to implement this global biodiversity framework, we have to rally resources from all sources, and therefore we underline that it is extremely important to provide sufficient funding for the implementation of the GBF, and that as well it is essential so that we do not again have to face the situations and the lessons that we had faced in the past concerning the implementation of the Aichi targets and the objectives related to Aichi. It is very important to take into account this element of the mobilization of resources. Also, we have got to provide all the tools that allow implementation, in particular the transfer of technology and capacity building. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam. Before I give the floor to India, which is actually the last speaker on my list from parties, I would like to ask you to remove your face mask when you speak so that the interpreters can better hear you. And don't forget, please, to upload your statements in the system. Oh, Jordan. Yeah, but now I give the floor to India and followed by Jordan. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The financial mechanism should appropriately address all the three objectives of convention in the balanced manner. Considering the crucial link between biodiversity and poverty eradication, especially for addressing most vulnerable and marginalized population, and recognizing the link between biodiversity and ecosystem services like clean air, water, and soil, there should be a strong linkage between GEF and Green Climate Fund. Also, there is a need to integrate the means of implementation and resource mobilization in the framework, which must include provision for financing biodiversity actions, scientific and technical cooperation, and technology transfer, since these have been major obstacles so far in achieving Aichi biodiversity target. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, India. And now I give the floor finally to Jordan. Jordan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, we welcome all the documents that have been prepared and the consideration of the finance mechanisms to do with the JEF. And we thank the JEF for all the efforts that it had made during the past period. But we are of the opinion that during the previous sessions, there was a reduction in the funds submitted by JEF to eligible countries, and also the mechanism of JEF to receive funds, and the several rules and regulations do require a great deal of time to access this funding, and this makes the implementation slower. And therefore, we look forward during the 8th session of JEF, we look forward to see what decisions will be taken during our meetings on the ambitious GBF for post-2020 to protect biodiversity, and also the ability of the JEF to fund. We underline that it is extremely important to work through a mechanism that would enable access of funding from other sources that strengthen the Rio Conventions and that would strengthen cooperation between the Rio Conventions. We also would like to indicate that urgent interventions should not be as part of the basic grants to developing countries, because all of that increases the technical and financial burden on the member states. The funding mechanism is extremely important for us to be able to attain success. And while we have spoken of a sum of 20 billion annually, is it possible for that to be through the GEF, and taking note also of the nature of the mechanism that is used by the GEF currently? Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, sir. I recognize Bangladesh has asked for the floor. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Bangladesh stresses on the importance of Global Empowerment Facility as the financial mechanism for CBD and its role over the years. And we stresses much more on fast-track mobilization of resources for biodiversity conservation in the developing countries and least developed countries and most vulnerable countries like Bangladesh. So considering the role of GEF, we want to see that for implementation of post-2020 biodiversity target, especially target 910, Bangladesh stresses on allocation of at least 800 billion per year, that is about 1% of global GDP. If we want to ensure that the credible implementation of post-2020 biodiversity framework will be implemented, then all the parties, all the countries should come forward, and biodiversity conservation should be given the utmost importance in terms of all kind of expenditure and spending. So out of this 800 billion or 1% of GDP, Bangladesh would like to stress on that at least 400 billion per year should be allocated for biodiversity conservation in these countries which are most vulnerable, which are suffering from climate change disasters and all other vulnerabilities. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have now further requests for the floor from Tanzania, Gabon, and Cameroon. And I will now close the list of speakers, also to give major groups and others opportunity to speak here under this agenda item. So I now give the floor to Tanzania, followed by Gabon, and finally Cameroon.
Okay.
Tanzania, you have the floor.
Okay. The URT wishes to add up our voice to this agenda item, and we also welcome the preliminary report of the GF Council. The URT recognizes the vitality of having predictable and reliable financial resources to finance biodiversity conservation, in particular the post-2020 GBF. The ambitiousness of the post-2020 GBF should go hand in hand with the assurance of resources to the parties, particularly the developing countries, to implement the NBSUBs and the post-2020 GBF at large. The URT is grateful for the long-term being the beneficiary of the GF funds in complementing the government efforts to conserve biodiversity. However, the URT would like to request the GF to increase its effectiveness in terms of the processing time from the time taken during the approval of the projects to its implementation. The URT also requests the GF to increase in developing the national capacities in preparation of the GF projects according to the financial and other guidelines. The URT believes that GF8 has a very critical role to play in support of the implementation of the post-2020 GBF alongside other financial mechanisms, including the national budgets. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Tanzania. I give now the floor to Gabon. You have the floor, Gabon.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank Switzerland for the holding of this session. Concerning the mobilization of resources, I would like to recall that it is a key element in the search for the goals under the new global framework. We would like that this framework takes lessons from its previous experience, not to repeat the errors. This GBF must focus on transfer of technologies and other areas. Now we are in plain GF8 replenishment. However, this discussion must not be reduced to the mechanisms, be it the GEF or any other facilities. We must have a more efficient mechanism that would respond to the needs of countries, including the most vulnerable countries, to assure the flow of funds, to assure financing that would be adequate, predictable, and innovative in the context of the challenges to biodiversity that we're coming across. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabon. I give now the floor to Cameroon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having given me the floor. Cameroon would like to thank the Secretariat and Switzerland for organizing this session. We're convinced that our success in establishing conditions for the new GBF would depend on support to the developing countries, including the least developed ones. Now we have to preview clear and adequate mechanisms for financing in accordance with the needs of the country so that we could mobilize the human capital of the entire humanity. That could be achieved by establishing a biodiversity facility as proposed by China. Now the world is coming across an insufficiency in environmental security, and countries are not capable of mobilizing sufficient funds for a just cause. We must make nature a priority and invest in biodiversity, because that means that we could preserve it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cameroon. Distinguished delegates, I have closed the list of speakers for parties, but on my screen I see a request for the floor from Chad and Peru. So I would like to give Chad and Peru the opportunity to speak also under this agenda item, and hopefully stick to 3 minutes at the maximum. So to allow us also to give the floor to non-parties and major groups to speak under this agenda item. So Peru, you have the floor, followed then by Chad. Peru.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We thank Switzerland as the host country. Now our statement: Peru believes it is very important to mobilize resources from all sources in order to efficiently implement the post-2020 GBF. That's why we state the following. First, in accordance with the decisions 8.23.9.1, 12.5, and 13.21, etc., international contributions must be prioritized in favor of agriculture in order to preserve ecosystemic resources, to preserve genetic biodiversity, which maintains and will maintain food security and nutrition for humanity, and would mitigate the negative effect of the climate change, reducing poverty. The countries that could increase their contribution to environment protection must invest in investigations of genetic biodiversity. Second, concerning the targets for biodiversity conservation, we should recommend in financing on the basis of the real markers, with the main indicator as the amounts of used funds. We must be equitable in this, with a confirmation that the disbursements will serve preservation of biodiversity. That would require incremental increase in the disbursement, and every country would establish the amounts to be invested in accordance with its priorities and the established framework. We believe that GF8 would help to eliminate the deficiencies and help to achieve the goals and objectives of the global framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. And now I give the floor to Chad. You have the floor, Chad.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Nous saluons.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. We would like to express our sincere thanks to Switzerland for having organized these meetings, and our thanks to the Secretariat for putting forward these documents on mobilization, resource mobilization. Now, that being the case, Chad believes that these documents must be focused on, because the mobilization of resources is the key to the implementation of the post-2020 framework. And Chad would like to suggest that a fund for biodiversity be created, just like the funds that we have in climate change and the Adaptation Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chad. We will now move to interventions from other governments, followed by organizations, beginning with major groups. Each statement should not exceed 2 minutes, so please stick to 2 minutes statement. I don't see requests from other governments for the floor. I open the floor for organizations, beginning with major groups. I see no requests from major groups. So I asked ACTO to take the floor. ACTO, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The organization of the Amazon Treaty includes countries like Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Suriname, Peru, Venezuela. We try to achieve the goals of the CBD Convention, and we're fully committed to an ambitious agenda concerning biodiversity. However, this mission is closely connected to the means of implementation that are structural in nature, innovation, technology, etc., are crucial for this commitment. The financing must be previsible and adequate, and funds must be prioritize developing countries for work both on the national and international level, including especially biodiverse countries. Our countries have the highest level of biodiversity in the world, and that accords with item 6, as well as the post-2020 GBF. Let me inform that the efforts of our 8 countries in recent years led us to adopt the first regional program for biodiversity and the first study for a rapid improvement of biodiversity on the basis of scientific facts and knowledge of indigenous people. The peoples of this region are united in order to work in favor of this document on the basis of the methodology that we have at our disposal. Our organization is disposed to work together with you and your secretary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Actor. I recognize FAO. FAO, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As several said, the future of food and agriculture is inextricably linked to biodiversity, given that the agricultural sectors depend on biodiversity and ecosystem services. Sustainable food and agriculture can make a significant contribution to the sustainable use, enhancement, conservation and restoration of biodiversity. We therefore welcome the addition of the term other relevant agreements to the contributions of biodiversity relevant conventions in the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. FAO has become a full-fledged member of the GEF in 2006, and this partnership has helped to deliver 291 projects in over 130 countries across continents. Today, our portfolio consists of 291 approved projects with a grant of 1.2 billion. And this covers all 5 GEF focal areas and is increasingly composed of multifocal areas and cross-sectoral integrated approaches. The standalone biodiversity focal area share of the portfolio accounts for 15%, and in addition, the biodiversity component accounts for 30% of the multifocal area projects. Therefore, with regard to strengthening partnerships, FAO stands ready to provide fast-track support to governments to immediately work on post-2020 global biodiversity targets, including enabling activities on work in the agri-food systems. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, FAO. I see no more requests for the floor. Thank you very much, delegates, for your contributions on these agenda items and for sharing your views. Distinguished delegates, the contact group established by the SBI chair at part 1 of our meeting will continue its work and will also consider these new documents and the interventions just made at its session. It will be chaired by Mrs. Ines Vallet from Belgium and Mr. Jean-Nizani Monsetti from South Africa. The contact group will hold its next meeting on Thursday, 17th March from 3 to 6 p.m. Distinguished delegates, this concludes our consideration of agenda item 6. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our plenary meeting for today. Before we close, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for any announcement. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to remind delegates that Contact Group 1 under the Working Group on Goal Structure and Sections A to E will meet tomorrow morning. Contact Group 2 under the Working Group on Targets 1 to 8 will meet in the afternoon. Both will be in this plenary room. In the evening time slot, there will be a contact group on SBI item 9 on review mechanisms and a contact group on Substar item 9 on health. Please check the boards for room assignments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. We will take up agenda item 5 in the next meeting of the SBI Plenary, which will take place on the 18th of March. The plenary is adjourned. Thank you very much.